Hey everybody, welcome back again. We only have about a little more than 2 weeks left. And you know, got some things coming down the pike here. Um, I've actually already started grading some of the rewrites for the housing reaction story, and also the Megalomania story. So you know, we'll review a little bit of that stuff, and then we'll go into what will be the last new assignment to be posted? Of course, the major assignment will be the last assignment, and that there's actually going to be an assignment entry for that, which I'll probably post on Monday or Tuesday. But you know, there's a lot of things to go basically just cover, just as far as like you know, writing the right way, that sort of thing. You know, being able to be a storyteller and also like learning how not to like rely so heavily on quotes, which I made a big deal about in the housing situation story. I feel like sometimes I have to admit, like, there's a sense of urgency to the summer semester because I feel like because there's such a short amount of time that I might be more inclined, to be honest with you, to give an R to an assignment because I feel like I really want people to kind of rewrite their stuff, and learn stuff. And probably, again, probably the best way to, this is really the ultimate class in learning by doing, to be honest with you. So there were a lot of R's, and you might wonder, like, on that housing reaction story, and you might wonder, like, well, how does that, like, not, how does paraphrase, the calling for paraphrasing over direct quoting, how does that make things, as I've said before, not understandable? It's like one of my criteria for like getting essentially a C or above. Because I feel as though like it's also like part of the, probably should make this clear. It's part of the instruction is to actually write is to do things a certain way. If I feel like the people aren't really kind of like compliant with the structure, or I'm sorry, complying with the instructions, then they're not writing it a way that I feel is like the correct way, and therefore maybe not understandable. I feel also like when people rely too heavily on quotes, again, like when you see like some monster quote, it's like really long and everything. It really tends to kind of intimidate people in a way. They tend to meander, and in that way, in that sense, it makes the story a little bit unreadable. I even made the point in a bunch of articles saying that, again, the easiest thing to do would be to write something like, well, you know what? Let me actually like split the screen already. The easiest thing in the world to do would be to, and this is the example I was showing last week. The easiest thing in the world right now, oops, would be to write a story that was just this. He said, blah, 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 direct quote. But she said, blah, blah, blah. But he said, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that would make for an unreadable story, therefore not very understandable. It would make, because if you have like these really long quotes, again, people tend to meander. They bring up like certain facts and things like that that actually like, and that's usually part of like some sort of a run-on sentence. But what you can do is as a writer is you can like take what they say and essentially like shorten it, like shorten the sentence, manipulate the wording so that it actually comes across clearer, maybe even more dramatic, that sort of thing. So, um, and this is going to be especially important with the assignment that I actually just posted on Thursday. I'm taping this on Thursday for this, so for Friday. And that is the feature assignment because that really demands like good storytelling, and it really demands you to write in a way that like that you're narrating the story. So it's where you're actually like being, not relying on like being a stenographer and writing on people's like long quotes, but actually writing a story that's actually clever and engaging. When you write a feature story, it's a human interest story. It's actually something that's, and I'll be getting into this, but it's basically something that actually is written, again, said this before, written to be read. The idea is that you want to get people past the first paragraph and you find ways to actually hook them in and you write in like maybe a little more of I won't say it's creative writing, but it's a little more of a creative way. And you interpret what they say and that sort of thing. And you put things in your own words and you describe like things they're going through and they tell you these things. They tell you, give you information so that you can like take it and write it in your own way. Okay. They don't give you the information so you can just repeat what they say. Okay. So I have like what I've seen so far in terms of like the stories are coming in, and then the rewrites for that story. So that's good. Okay. Um, the other thing we have, let's like just go to like the list of stuff. I'm gonna have the teacher. This is the teacher view of this to show you what I actually have. Almost about every story is gonna be assigned. We'll be talking about the feature rewrite next week. And then of course the major assignment. Both actually, I should let you know that we have the feature assignment. That's the newly posted thing that's posted for June 27th. That's actually, I'm sorry, the deadline is June 27th. That's a week. But then the rewrite will be due a week after that, and it'll be actually due on July 3rd. Okay, the day before July 4th, obviously, holiday. So I mean, it'll be in a week, but it also will be due the same day as the major assignment. So you should be aware of that. Okay, so you have like to basically do both things at the same time, which is what we've been pretty much doing this whole semester. We've had to essentially like two things to do each week. We've had to rewrite an assignment, the previous assignment, and at the same time we've had to do a new assignment. That's no different this week. That's why another reason why I got an early start on like just basically just creating everything because there's a lot to do. So. Anyway, we have the Megalomania assignment, a few of those that came in. Um, and again, like, I mean, I kind of gave away hints, strong hints in previous videos of what this story is supposed to be about. Um, you know, Actually, I mean, so far what I've seen has actually been pretty good. I mean, I've actually graded three stories so far. Two of them were R's, but the reason why they were R's is because they lack the detail to make this more of the story that it appears. Okay. Again, without giving away the theme of the story, okay? You have a story about somebody like some sort of a change, it's like a big change or something like that. You really have to like again, just like we did with that, remember that Easter Bunny thing, with the chocolate and the motivation, trying to find out as much information as possible. What made this attempted murder like more unique than any other? Well, it's the same thing here. Like what makes this company change more unique than any other? And when you dig into the details of the Excel spreadsheet that should have been provided to you already, I really actually should have. I mean, you really should have long got it already. Um, you're going to see some stuff in there that's actually pretty, as they say, egregious. Okay, you're going to see stuff that's actually like that was like basically illegal stuff was committed. Okay, and that should be in the story. I mean, it could just basically the way to handle this kind of thing. And I didn't actually talk about this a lot. Is attribution is essential to like any of our stories, but this is a little bit different this one because you are actually interviewing somebody like that's Bill Borden, but at the same time, the information is coming from a document or documents. So what you should just do is just say according to company documents. That's how you footnote or attribute information to a source in a story. And that Excel spreadsheet is going to be key, okay? Because that has the stuff in it that really makes this a much larger story, if not, I mean, a national story, yeah, not just a local story. So, yeah, that's very important that you actually like use information from that, okay? Um, all right, so that's that actually I posted the rewrite for that. There's always something being posted. So that's another thing that's actually been newly posted. Um, Sorry, let's go back a little bit here. So there you see it again. Remember that there's a difference. There's a rewrite entry and then there's the original draft entry. Okay, so this is new. That's been posted. Okay, rewrite for the Megalomania, which will be due June 27th, the same day that the feature story is due. Okay, all right. And of course, this Monday is the major assignment proposal. I've gotten two. I've gotten two back from that. I actually did reject one of them. One thing to keep in mind about that is that, as I outline here, like you really need to do something that's maybe I should have been clear about this in the assignment entry, but you really need to do something that's tangible. Like one of the assignments I suggested was very earnest, and I can understand where the idea came from. It all came from, good creative thinking, that sort of thing. But um, the idea essentially had to deal with something where, maybe it's like some sort of a national phenomenon, but or maybe it's something that involves like celebrities or something like that. But you would need to interview essentially celebrities that do it. I'm not looking for anybody to provide like a commentary or anything like that on like something that's happening involving like um something that's actually not doesn't have an effect on people as a whole, I mean, like for instance, I'm not looking for people to do like a commentary or any kind of commentary, really. That's not what we do. Unlike what the Kardashians do or something like that, or unless I'm looking for something that if you're gonna look at a national story, maybe you look at like something like, I don't know, people's reactions to, let's say, the Israel's attack on Iran, that sort of thing, or maybe people like worried about the America getting involved, that sort of thing. That's probably one of the largest. There's other stuff going on in this country too that we could write about that might have an effect on people. There's trends in the entertainment world or whatever that are happening that maybe people could react to that has some sort of spark some sort of interest. But you really need to do something that maybe I actually strongly suggest you just do a reaction story because you only have about a week and a half to do that story. So, once it's turned in on Monday, then it's, that's what you have. You have essentially, um, you have from that Monday, by Monday, or let's say I did approve one, so that person now has like about 2 weeks to do it. So, but once I approve it by Monday, you have from Monday up until, July 3rd, which is what, about 10 days to do this story. So, normally when I've done online, I've done asynchronous for some fall and spring semester. I've um I've given people like at least a month because I'm able to do that. But well, our whole semester is like a month long, so I can't do that. I can only give you like about 10 days. So I really you can't, I need you to be able to do something that where you can actually like get out there, interview people. I really would strongly suggest you even just interview. I mean, I don't know where you live, but maybe you interview something that's going on in your town, so where you can actually interview people. And by the way, I don't care if you interview like friends or relatives or anything like that for this kind of story. I'm just looking for you to write it well, okay? Maybe like, Rutgers students around, that sort of thing. I can even help you out and put up a discussion point for your story, that sort of thing. Okay, so that could help. All right. And speaking of which, by the way, there's a discussion point that's posted for the new assignment, the feature story. Okay. All right. All right. So that's make sure you get that in. That's got to be something that's really essentially doable, something where you can actually interview people directly, people who are affected directly, that sort of thing. Okay. Um, all right. So let's talk about the feature story. Okay. All right. So this is actually, you should also know, by the way, that if you remember actually, and I should go back to that actually. So by now, and I've seen the great improvement in your writing and that sort of thing. Overall, it's very pleased with the way things have gone this semester. There's a few people, I mean, there was one assignment I sent back to somebody because I felt like they kind of regressed on the rewrite. I didn't give them a lower grade because it's my policy. I don't give lower grades on a rewrite. Okay. I just give you the same grade you had before. But there were like certain things that like you really got to follow my instructions for rewrites. There's things that just weren't there, that sort of thing. So, um, anyway, let's go. Actually, this is actually in the modules, which is an area we have to go to anyway. Um, rubric and grading. Remember that. Again, so I care more about like the last stuff you do as opposed to the first stuff you do. So, you know, remember the writing grade is 70%. And then of course this part right here, I'm sorry, the writing grade is 70%, but the 30% of the is also class participation. That's like participating in a discussion point, which I think everybody did. And then now this new discussion point that'll be coming up, I give like a little, you call, for lack of a better term, bonus points where people might like reach out and need help. If you have that kind of situation, you should. I had one person that did exactly that. That was great. Worked out well. So anyway, as far as the writing grade is concerned, so this is how we go through it. We do the very first one, which is where you really learn how to write the news writing. And I saw a lot of good, there was a lot of good work there. That was the profile assignment, okay? I mean, it's amazing how fast we're going through the semester. Then of course this is the Leeds worksheet assignment, okay? That was the second one. So that was 10% of the 70%. The profile was 10%. The third one, of course, was the housing reaction. That's the one you're actually like submitting for the rewrites right now. That's also 10%. Okay, and then the megalomania, it's 10%. Okay. Now what I'm assigning you now, which is due a week from today, is the feature assignment. So this is where we start to like actually like kind of take the assignments actually become like essentially those they kind of become all encompassing, and they kind of like take into consideration everything you've done so far, with maybe like a little bit of an added twist to it. Okay. So feature stories are written a little bit differently than your typical stories, but again, you kind of like take into account like things we've learned, like especially like things like paraphrasing when you shouldn't be like directly quoting, explaining things in an accurate and clear and focused way. Of course, the major assignment is very much like that too. That'll be the last one. So the feature assignment will be worth twice as much as one of these, the original story ideas assignments. And then the last one, the major assignment, which will be due July 3rd, that will be worth 4 times one of these. So that's 40% of your grade. Okay. Um, all right. So anyway, so that's how things work. So these last assignments really do count a lot. So make sure you get them in on time, the whole thing. Okay. Um, all right. So actually, before I get to the assignment, I'll show you. So now we're into the essentially, so if you've kept along, we've actually discussed as much as this is possible. We had a course introduction. This is the modules. We had the more about the writing basics. Okay. And then, I mean, a lot of this is about writing basics, more of writing basics, AP style. News writing structure, that's actually when we get into things like the reaction story, where I talk about the importance of having a lead, a transition, and if possible, some additional depth like anecdotes, okay? And quotes, and how to handle those, okay? Then, of course, we got into PR writing. That was the megalomania assignment. You see, dates kind of, I mean, that's a particular week that we dealt with it, okay? And I mean, see, week 3, June. This is when I actually released the videos. So there's like 2 of these module pieces a week. Okay. We didn't really deal a lot with writing for media and ethics. It's not something I feel is actually like totally like well handled in this particular class. I feel it's actually better for essentially like, maybe actually like higher level journalism classes. And now we have the feature news, okay? And then we have the major assignment preparation, which we'll be talking more about, I guess, the coming week, once we have all your ideas in. And don't forget also idea making, much like with the housing, when I did extra credit for that, that also goes into your extra credit situation, okay? Sorry, not extra credit. Goes into your class participation situation, okay? I take that into account. So anyway, feature news. Now, there are 2 chapters of the book that I have actually assigned. It's the last 2 chapters I've asked you to read. This chapters 8 and 12, which I'll talk about probably on Monday. But I actually feel like um, the better information that came from previous textbooks on how to do a feature story. So I've included a lot of that actually within this module itself, the module for feature news. Okay. What is a feature? What is a feature assignment? Well, a feature assignment essentially is something that deals with what they call softer news. Okay. Let me call up my demonstration thing. Actually, that's the example that I thought worked well. Okay, so go. No, that's not it again. I apologize. Here we go. All right. Yeah, I've been using Andrew N a lot. All right, so I've told you about how like a lot of stories, probably most stories, especially breaking news stories, they have a lead, okay? And then usually like, you bring up different points. This could be like a car accident or something like that. And you think about this within the inverted pyramid structure. Most important part is the lead, and then the details get like less important as you move along. Those are transitions, okay? Essentially that guide the reader along the different elements of what happened, that sort of thing, okay? I meant to say transition singular, sorry. Okay. All right. What we did now, there's stories that actually go a little bit more in depth, and we just did that with the story on the housing situation. So that's a story that's actually more written to be read, but it's not quite a feature story, but it's close actually. Okay, so you have the lead, you have a trend. So the lead, it basically like brings up the point as straight as possible with as few words as possible. Okay. You have a transition that helps break down the lead, and an anecdote that essentially, brings some sort of relatable experience, that sort of thing that should be paraphrased, really. A slice of life, a small story within the story on, on the major, on the overall topic. Okay. And then maybe that's when you come in with a direct quote after that. It was so frustrating or something like that. Was one of the direct quotes I saw in one of the housing stories, and that's exactly the kind of direct quote I'm looking for. Something that's kind of emotional, something that's a little colorful. When you start listing details, like I saw some direct quotes where they say like the toilet, and they talk about the housing. The toilet was yellow and there was roaches on the wall. I mean, that's not really a direct quote. That's actually something that's better written. Because then you can actually, when you actually like use your own words, you can actually like do things like show drama, stuff like that. You could do, and with the sentence structure, you could do like, he looked down, period. He saw yellow in the toilet, period. Then he looked up, period. He saw cockroaches on the wall. See? So instead of just like making that like a meandering direct quote, you can actually like manipulate it with the use of periods and punctuation and sentences, and then making your sentences short, dramatic. Okay. Anyway, so you have your anecdote, your quote, then you go to another transition, which brings up another point. Transition. Oops, not transition. I'm sorry. Anecdote, and then another quote. Sometimes you could have like another anecdote that relates to this transition. Okay. You could do that too. Okay. Could vary a little bit. Another anecdote, maybe another quote. That's a good system to follow. Rinse, repeat. Okay. Um, so that's how we did the housing situation story. So one of the probably the biggest difference, and I'll be covering that in this module and also in the reading. The biggest difference with a feature story is that it's really two things, okay? You still basically follow the same sort of more in-depth news structure, the one that's not necessarily breaking news, but has the depth like relatable anecdotes and things like that. But first of all, it starts with the top. The top is different. This is really a story, even more of a story than any others we've done, where we're really trying hard to get people to read the whole damn story. Okay. And the lead is really the most important part of the story. I sent one lead back. I sent one story back to somebody, or I sent them back saying like, this lead is not, needs work. It needs to be corrected, that sort of thing. And I think I gave an R on it because it was just so confused and didn't work. So the lead is the most important part of the story. And it's especially apparent here in these feature stories because, again, probably 90%, 95% of the stories are out there basically deal with, the idea that like most people just kind of read the lead and then they move out, like a tweet. or X, whatever, and they're done. Okay. They find out about like what's the latest on the Israeli bombing of Tehran, and then they move on. They just find out what they needed to know. Okay. But this story is actually a story where a reporter works hard on because they want the story to be written to be they want the story to be read from top to bottom. Okay. Um, and that again starts with the lead. So the lead actually, this is where it gets really contradictory to like what you've been used to. I've been telling you all semester that leads should be one sentence. And yes, 90 to 99% of the time they are. Okay. But in feature stories, the ones that actually are supposed to be what they call softer, lighter, maybe more engaging, okay, than what we're used to. Um, Something again that engages you to the point where you actually will read the story from top to bottom. The lead actually is not just one sentence, it's maybe several sentences. In fact, it's like actually it can be a couple of paragraphs, okay? That's called an anecdotal lead or a narrative lead, which is what the book calls it, okay? An anecdotal lead, okay? An anecdotal lead. What the hell is an anecdotal lead? Well, it's essentially an anecdote at the top of the story, okay? Instead of having just something straight, you're taking maybe some sort of anecdote, like we've had down here, we've been talking about recently, and you put it at the top of the story. And the idea there is you're actually trying to hook the reader into the story with some sort of engaging little story. Okay. Instead of just like blasting the news at them in their face and hoping that that's enough, you're actually working even harder to get them hooked into the story. It's usually a story that's actually a little timeless. It's a story that's actually like not usually the story that's at the top of a newspaper because it's not a breaking news story. A lot of times it's a story that might work as what they call a sidebar to a main story. You have a story maybe about um the bombing of Tehran, a sort of thing, and then it's maybe there's like some sort of a timeless sidebar to that. Maybe that interviews people who are being essentially like bombed or going through the bombings or something like that, and like or maybe on the other side, people, because Iran has been bombing Israel, okay? People in Israel, you get their opinions on what they're personally going through. Because so these stories are more personal, and they start off in a more personal way. You take that slice of life that we talk about, and you make that actually the lead, okay? So what does that mean? So instead of like basically blasting out, let's take something like kind of more something we've already done, a housing situation, for instance, okay? Um, all right. We've basically said like many students, this have been our lead. Many students say they don't like the housing situation, saying it's too hard, blah blah blah. Well, what you do is you take maybe like one of these anecdotes right from down here and you put it at the top. Okay, that you would normally put down here. So then I've had people like Joe Brown. So it actually starts off more vague. Get that. It's actually good to be vague in these types of stories, okay? Because actually what you're doing in these stories, they have things that the stories we've been doing don't have. One of the things that they have is they they have they're actually the closest thing we have to creative writing in journalism, okay? It's the closest thing to like essentially like novel writing you have in journalism. They have like maybe like a little bit of mystery. They have a little bit of suspense, and they kind of bring you along in a suspenseful way that you're like okay, so so it's almost like some sort of a cliffhanger, okay? And the idea there is that it's a kind of a slower, more suspenseful way of bringing you into the story. It's a risky story to write, which is why they don't do it all the time, okay? That's why they write more like straighter stories all the time, because it's much easier to do that. It's hard to write an anecdotal lead. Otherwise, they would be doing them all the time. And also it's not for the reader who's on a rush. Most readers are on a run. I like to say this, the difference between the reader who is reading the freaking story on the iPhone on the subway or whatever, getting into work right away, as opposed to a feature story, which is more for the Sunday train rider who's got maybe all the time in the world because they're going to go see the Met or something like that. and they got more time to read. So it's more of it's more for that kind of reader. So it's more of a suspenseful thing. So maybe let's go to the yellow toilet bathtub thing. Joe Brown looked down. He saw yellow in the toilet. Of course, we should attribute, he said. Then you maybe even go to like a new paragraph and you say, that was it for Brian until he looked up. He said he saw roaches on the wall. And maybe come in with a direct quote. I have had it. This is gross. Okay. This is all the lead. It's a suspenseful. You have different audiences for the who are reader. You have news readers in general, but you have within the among the news readers, you have different audiences. You have the readers who want the fast new breaking news stuff, and then you have the readers who could be the same person who want the slower stuff, the more engaging stuff, because maybe they have more of the time. The older people usually are like this. They like these stories. This is more magazine writing. Okay. Magazines actually take more of that kind of slower and more engaging, more suspenseful mystery approach. Okay. All right. So basically, like what we're doing is we're being suspenseful and we're like, "God, what's going to happen next? Did he fall into you're actually, this is actually intended to kind of leave things as a cliffhanger. Okay. One point, oh my God, yellow. Oh my God, what's the next thing? They're going to blow up. You're actually like supposed to kind of add and create some sort of a mystery. So these are called essentially teases, okay? They have these on news broadcasts too. I've seen these like Channel 2 News in New York actually like does a lot of stories about like poison food poisoning at restaurants and stuff like that. And they do this sort of thing where it's actually almost like a feature. They say like what you're about to hear may kill you or something like that. And then they don't have the report until the end of the broadcast, you know. So these are essentially teases, okay? This is all within the framework of the anecdotal lead. This is all part of the lead, okay? And then what you do is when again the last thing that comes in with an anecdotal lead, again, this is all a lead. It said, but instead of one sentence or one paragraph, it's about four, okay? You come in with what's called a nut graph because even though even though it's a story that actually is engaging, a little slower to enter and that sort of thing. It's still a news. And unlike a mystery story, you don't want to wait until the last paragraph to reveal the big mystery. You actually have your big reveal a little earlier. And, you know, so we say Brown. Brown is among so you try to bleed in like the suspense that's coming into this paragraph that finally answers that question. It's like also call a delayed lead. What is this story about? Okay. It's among a number of students who say they don't like the housing situation at Rutgers, feeling like it's poorly maintained. Okay. So then that's when you have like your big reveal. This could be like essentially the first paragraph of the story. Only well, the big difference right here is that you're kind of building up in a suspenseful, anecdotal way, and then you have the big reveal. Okay, so that's the big difference right there. That's the biggest difference right there between a normal, typical news story that we've been doing and a feature story. They also give other names to feature stories. They call it softer news because it's a softer way of actually handling the story. It's also Sunday news because this is actually how when the Sunday newspaper used to be the biggest paper of the week. It used to be the most popular one. It was the biggest one, had all the ads in it and everything. The problem is that a lot of people didn't work on Saturdays, so they would actually do these what they called evergreen stories. They do these stories that actually ahead of time, and they would build up these feature stories so they could help fill these vast space of the newspaper, which was big. Now, actually, I think the most popular reading day is actually Tuesday, and everything is done digitally. So, but yeah, this is actually how they used to fill up the paper with these longer, more engaging stories. Now we're going to do a typical length, 500, 800 words for this assignment we're doing, but this is actually Um, but a lot of these stories tend to be typically longer. Okay. So anyway, so this is the kinds of stories we would do. They'd be more like more timeless, that sort of thing. They wouldn't be like a breaking news story, so you could actually hold it till Sunday and run it then. That sort of thing. Okay. And also the theory was that on Sunday, it's not so much the case anymore, but most people didn't work on Sunday, so they had more time to actually read these stories. Sports news was really good for that. I mean, that was the day you would have a lot of sports features, things like that. Of course, Sunday being football day, that was always helpful for that. Um, you know, people's spouses used to get mad at each other when like one of them would read the Sunday paper because it would take like all day. I mean, the New York Times was like, I don't know if it still is, but it used to be like that thick on crazy. It's pretty heavy. So once you get into the anecdotal lead, then actually kind of like return to essentially the pattern we've already been doing. Okay. Transition anecdote quote. Okay, that we did on the housing situation story, a more in-depth story. So then you have a lead that kind of breaks things down. Some say they don't like the effort that's made to clean the housing. Okay, so maybe that's like one point that's brought up. One of the other differences is that when we get into the anecdotes and things like that, there's actually like a little bit more of demand for like description. Okay, so it's you want to be accurate, clear, and focused, but you also want to be a little more descriptive too. So maybe like you write about things like not just like how people were feeling and their personal experiences, but also maybe the setting they're in. You would maybe describe like, you would say like Tim Jones, um, you would actually like try to describe more of environmental stuff. The where becomes a little more important because it's much more because it's actually just an extra detail that kind of makes you feel like you're there. These stories really try to like do more than anything to make you feel like you're there. Was sitting in his apartment and smelling the foul odor. Yeah, so maybe you would say something like that. You would describe a little bit more of the like what's seen and what he sees and what he smells and the senses and things like that. He said he's tried to get a better place to live, but hasn't succeeded. Okay. Sitting in his apartment, I should say, sitting in his dorm. Okay. All right. And you'd have a direct quote like, it's so foul that it sickens me or something. And then you go to another transition. Okay. That's my basic lesson on how to handle these stories. What I do here is actually provide like certain examples of stories. So I think like some of the best education you can get actually not just from chapters 8 and 12, and also watching this video is also looking up the module more than any other module. And actually I provide like a way of like showing in a video how I've actually taken discussion points and taken those discussion points and turned them into stories. Okay. So this week we prepared to do a feature writing. Class will be doing a feature news assignment. I know I haven't gotten to that yet, but I will in a minute. It'll require you to think on your feet and provide more depth to your work. More details to come, but here's an example of a feature story with an anecdotal lead. So this is a story actually is interesting because like I said, a lot of times these stories are actually supposed to be timeless. And a lot of times there's stories that kind of branch off like big breaking news stories or something. Like I said, they're usually like maybe sidebars to the main story, or a lot of times they're follow-ups. And maybe there's no major breaking news that day. So what they do is they singularly focus on one person, and their plight or troubles, or maybe a group of people in their plight. And that's another thing too, by the way. When we write these stories, the top should really focus on just one person. Everybody got me? Really, when you do any of the kinds of these stories, you should try to focus on one person at a time in your anecdotes. When you focus on groups of people, I've seen people do that where they write feature stories saying like people are walking around feeling dazed. Well, you can't get into any real depth when you talk about a group of people as opposed to one person's plight. You can get into more detail about where they live, how they live, what they're dealing, what they're seeing, that sort of thing. Okay. So that's why it's really good to start this story with like one person, like this story does. Okay, this is a story about essentially the Somali pirates and how they were essentially robbing people. This is like a long time ago now, almost 10 years ago. And actually like robbing people in the Mediterranean, that sort of thing. And so um the this was a story done a few years after that where they talked about how there's this one personal experience somebody had and how this person ended up getting himself caught. And that's essentially the lead of the story is like how one Somali pirate got himself caught through by being stupid, right? But instead of actually just coming out right with that nut graph, remember what the nut graph is, identifies what the story is about. It kind of gives you this engaging beginning, okay? Then actually like kind of where they don't tell you what the story is about. And that's the whole idea actually, is that God, what's going to happen to this guy? Is he going to like survive? Is something going to happen to him? You actually kind of leave those kinds of questions open. So this starts off with Somali pirates kidnapped and held Michael Scott Moore, a journalist, hostage for 2.5 terrifying years until a ransom payment secured his release in 2014. Okay. So what we got there essentially is something that happened. Came out in 2018. Has happened like 4 years before. So you know that what they're talking about is actually it's got to like lead you to believe like what happened here. What's going on here? Why are you bringing up something like 4 years ago? Is he okay? 2 months later, he received a surprising message on Facebook. See how these paragraphs are kind of short? That's actually like kind of adding a little drama to the story. How are you, Michael? The message said, I am your friend Mohammed Tahil. I want to speak with you. The sender's Facebook page included this photograph. Mr. Moore recognized him as one of the men who guarded him during his captivity in Somalia. He decided to write back. Okay. All right. So basically, we got this mystery about what's going on, what's going to happen, that sort of thing. Oh my God, what followed was an extraordinary exchange of Facebook messages between journalists and former captor. How long they communicated and when the conversation ultimately led, or has not been public, but in the summer, the Somali was taken into custody by United States authorities in jail in New York City. So this is actually the nut graph right here. Okay, this is the part where it actually tells you what you need, well, everything, basically what the story is going to be about. Okay. But what it did was it led you up in this kind of suspenseful, surprising, and almost like, oh my God, is something dangerous happening here? Kind of like suspenseful talk leading up to, okay, well, this is going to be a story about like how some guy like kind of stepped on his own foot and like, basically had an exchange on Facebook and led to his own arrest. Okay. Nobody got hurt, nobody, nothing like that, but there was somebody who was arrested. So, all right. So it's some slow way into entering into the story. Okay. Um, let's see here what we got. Um, a lot of times feature stories are featured with like big photos, as you can see. Um, they're they kind of like, you know, they're usually like located lower on the website of the New York Times, not higher. Okay. I used to do a website um for the it's interesting. I don't know why this is clear now, but I used to do a website that actually put people's stories on it, but that became like unnecessary because now there's actually much easier ways of doing it. Also, some of the programs that I had actually went out of stock. So but this is actually a story somebody did on the buses. Okay. Tiffany Gonzalez, staff writer. Rutgers sophomore Claire, I can't pronounce that still, quickly looked at the Rutgers was the next bus, and in 5 minutes, she immediately left her apartment. Oh no, what's going to happen? She make it across the curb? She quickly approached the bus stop, but she found the bus leaving. Frustrated, she cursed at the bus. Thanks to Next Bus, she waited at the bus stop for 10 minutes when she could have waited inside her warm apartment. Next bus sucks, she said. I'm so tired of running for buses that end up leaving me. So we have this situation where we have no idea what's going to happen when she steps out of her apartment to basically, oh, somebody just got really like frustrated and ended up being 10 minutes late. And it's also kind of, it's an anecdote. It's something that's relatable to everything that's everybody's going on. She's just one of many students at Rutgers who feels that the Rutgers bus system can waste a lot of the students' time and probably can say a little bit more, and basically doesn't work very well. Okay. And then what happens is then it goes through like transitions, and some of these quotes are probably a little bit long, but you know, and then like some sort of a paraphrase narrative, that sort of thing. Okay. All right. So yeah, this actually what I did was in this module is actually like essentially gave you like old textbook writing that actually I'm from an old writing from an old textbook I felt was actually like better and like more more exact as far as like identifying what a feature story is. Okay. So writing feature stories, differentiating feature stories from news stories is misleading. The two actually have a great deal in common, as I told you before. I was showing you that one story I was developing and how it basically returns to the same cycle that we've been doing in terms of like writing structure. Only the only difference being that part at that point being just the attempt of being more descriptive. Differences in emphasis. The styles that are commonly used for feature stories assume that the reader has more time to read. They require a central theme. The writer must be able to summarize the point of the story, but the writing may require that the reader go further to further understand the point of the story. Like at the top of the story, you have to actually read a little bit more in depth, hopefully be engaged. Characteristics of feature writing. To the reader, the feature story seems to have a more relaxed relaxed style of writing than the news story. It is easier to read than a news story. It's actually supposed to be a little bit lighter. Okay. Not like too light, but feature writers, however, work just as hard and just as disciplined as news writers. I mean, you're still probably doing even more reporting. Okay. Parts of a feature story. Feature stories have at least four parts: a lead, an engine graph. That's basically the lead is basically essentially I mean, they there's other terms that are other used, but essentially like a lead is basically something that draws you in, and they see the engine paragraph. That's actually that's actually the nut graph. Okay. Um, a good lead uses the first words or sentences of a story to build interest in the story's subject, but the reader must soon discover some benefit for reading. That's why there's no mystery reveal at the end, like a mystery novel. That's why it's still a news story in a way, and you should actually like come up relatively high with the big reveal. Okay. This textbook showed essentially the differences between like a regular news story and a feature story. Okay. So a regular news story has like a traditional lead as the body. It basically goes the answers to who, what, where, how, why, when. Let's not go into the ending. Basically, I mean, there's some contradiction to what they write and what I say. But now the feature story has like a narrative lead. That's essentially an anecdotal lead where it describes as a point of the story, create and has a narrative that creates suspense and foreshadowing. Okay. And then there's the nut graph that gives the theme of the story. And then there's the body that's actually very similar to what's over here. Okay. So that's like, again, that's the big difference. Okay. I mean, I know I said that um it's always good to like have like build a story at like one person at a time, but it's not always like that. Sometimes you take a story that it's actually like, I mean, for the sake of what we're doing, we're going to be building a story that goes with anecdotes focusing on one person at a time. Okay. But sometimes like you can take like maybe like you could take like a common everyday, even like a breaking news story and turn it into like a more of a feature-ish story. It's like suspenseful at the top, like this one right here. They carried knapsacks and bags to tote loot. They had a screwdriver to pry open doors and windows. Okay. Very vague. We have no idea what's going to happen. What's going to happen? People are going to get attacked. Oh my God. They had used latex gloves. Oh my God, what's gonna happen? Help me, gosh. They acted like professional criminals, but officials said that they were teenage burglars coached and directed by a Palm Harbor woman whose son and daughter were part of the gang. Okay. So that's a bit stunning. Okay, suddenly we go from like, oh my God, they're attacking to like a bunch of kids are doing this. It's actually supposed to be, there's a lot of irony in these types of leads where you kind of build up suspense and maybe you lead people to believe one thing, and you come up with a nut graph and you tell them it's like something completely that you didn't expect. Okay. Again, like there's like some other examples that's provided here, like with a straight news lead. After mass street protests in Poland, legislatures in the country's ruling party have abruptly reversed their positions and voted a proposal to completely ban abortion. Okay, that's a straight news lead. Um, but an anecdotal lead might be more like, like a more descriptive. At the dilapidated MOG in northern Brazilian city of Natal. Director Marcos Brandio, as I say that, walks over to the blood smeared floor to where the corpse has been laid. So basically, you're getting a little more description, that sort of thing. Um, and you're having like essentially like focusing on one person and like you know going one point at a time. Okay, all right. All right, so that's what we have for that's essentially like some good information to check on is in this module. It's again, it's under it's the second to last module, the feature news module. And of course, like I said, we'll go over chapters 12 and 18 on Monday in that video. Okay. Um, all right. Well, let's go to the actual assignment itself, okay? Which again is posted. All right. Again, due a week from today. So for this assignment, okay, I know it's going to sound like not the most interesting story idea in the world, okay, but I should tell you, weather is very popular. I discovered this when I worked at Patch.com, and we actually were given this program where we can actually keep track of the number of people reading a story at one time in real time. And it was interesting. I think that program in itself has changed journalism altogether, and probably not for the better, but we used to think that like writing these really long stories about politicians like grafting and stuff like that off of the public and stuff like that were the stories that people really wanted to know. Nope. People wanted to read about crazy animals doing things like squirrels riding on water skis. They like weird and the wild and the wacky. And they love weather. Not to go all alliteration here, but they love weather. You would think that maybe like stories that, weather about weather be redundant because people have weather apps and things like that. They can see like what the weather is for the next day. But actually, people love to read stories about whether it's like snow is coming or thunderstorms are coming. Okay. And you can think about it like, I mean, it's not just a story about, oh, the sky is blue or something like that. Or, it's not, that's just not a weather story. A weather story has impact. A weather story, you know, the rain could affect like things like what you do, like right now, maybe barbecues you have, outdoor gatherings. It could affect like driving and things like that, especially driving from place to place, going to work, especially if you have to like do things like drive to Rutgers or something like that, which if you don't have to do it right now, but I know that when the weather gets bad, man, it gets bad. If you're going to New York, the weather gets bad. It's horrible. Okay. It takes a lot longer to get here. We had some rain over the weekend and we were waiting for my son to come for a Father's Day celebration. It took him extra long because there was rain. It he had to drive from Summit to Metuchen, which shouldn't be like a half an hour drive normally, but it took him about an hour or longer because of the rain. So there's stuff like that that gets really affected. Okay. And snowstorms, especially. I know we haven't had many of them lately, climate change, right? But yeah. So anyway, that's become an important thing. So now we're dealing with a situation where the weather's getting a lot warmer, it's getting hotter. So what I want you to do essentially is to write a story that essentially gets reaction from people, a feature story on how they're reacting to the weather. Okay, the weather changing. I mean, we've had some weird weather recently. We had like weather that went down and felt like it was going down in the 50s. Not quite, but it felt that way. I actually was like starting to wear shorts again, and then I went back to pants, and then I went back to shorts. That's by the way, that's one of the biggest things that affects people with weather is that it may sound kind of silly, but we talk about things like all the news that goes on during a day, but what affects people probably more than anything is like what they're going to wear during the day. if you're like going through a situation where like it's like 69 or 65 degrees like 4 days in a row, and then like you have this day like yesterday, which was Wednesday, where like it seemed like it was starting off cold, and then somebody by the end of the day it was humid as hell. Um, that's a pain in the ass. I mean, you could be like someplace out somewhere or something like that, and you're wearing pants, and that can make you hot, especially if it's humid or something like that, and that can really affect your mood and what you're doing that day. So that's one of the things to take into consideration here. Okay. So anyway, for this assignment, you'll write a 500, 800 word story. It'll require you to flex your creative muscles. You're required to use an anecdotal lead with a nut graph. Okay. So that's one of the big difference here is that you take the information you got, the story you got, and you basically take maybe like whatever anecdote you might have had, might be about clothes, might be about driving, whatever, and you put it at the top of the story, okay? And build some sort of engaging, suspenseful lead to the story. And then in the story itself, you get like more descriptive, okay? So these leads describe the action in a narrative form. The narrative brings you to a nut graph, which ultimately answers this question: what is the story about? Make note of the details you see. Now, again, instead of just basically identifying the anecdote of somebody's personal plight, maybe you get into like a little bit more description, like what are the clothes they're wearing. Like we talk about AC, right? In the last story, well, do they have air conditioning that's helping them out? I remember I had an apartment when I was at Rutgers, and I actually sublet it the one semester, one between my junior and senior year, but I slept there one night during the summer, and oh my God, we had no air conditioning. It was horrid, terrible. Okay. I mean, I was literally like dripping with sweat. It was terrible. Okay. So stuff like that. I say, can you see their breath? Well, it's not cold outside, but who knows? We have had some weird and wacky weather here. Okay. Do people look tired? Try to be funny and show irony like this. This was actually from an actual story, okay? On Monday, Walter Schrub wore sandals as he rode the bus. It was warm. On Tuesday, it was cold. This is probably more for a story that's actually for the fall. But Schrub was still wearing sandals. See, kind of vague, but anecdotal. Why? I'm protesting the cold, he said. I hope God sees this, or at least Mother Nature. Then you get into a nut graph explains what the story is about, like basically about students or whatever dealing with the weather. Okay. Um, All right, so that's actually essentially what this story is about. You want to, it's not, no, this one doesn't have to be just about students, by the way. This one's just be about residents because you guys, a lot of you guys are on campus, things like that. Okay, so interview people about the weather, how it's impacting them in your area. I don't know where you are right now. Most of you are probably in New Jersey, so write about New Jersey weather. If you're somewhere else like China or something like that, write about the Chinese weather or something like that. Okay. Describe the warmer weather and how it feels. Write a story about how people appreciate, don't appreciate this time of year. Are they going outside? Whether they are they just staying outside with the AC? What do they think about the cooler? Let's say cooler weather. I should say actually the warmer weather. I apologize for that. Um, um, okay. Let me just take off this part too, because I try to extrapolate it from somewhere else. How about the commute? That maybe for their job or whatever, or they're driving, taking the bus, or walking to class or work, I should say. Please use an anecdote lead, like we talked about, that focuses on one person's experience with the weather going to the nut graph. Okay, and then I have a discussion point that I've already posted as well. Okay, um, save this. So please contribute to the discussion point. Yes, here we go again. Um, And I have the other one I still have pinned. That's the one about the housing, which I'll be unpinning soon. But so under discussions, it's there. Okay. How do you feel about the weather? Is it too consistent? Is it too rainy? Is it too hot? Okay. Please provide anecdotes that personify your feelings so that everybody can paraphrase. Notice I emphasize the paraphrase part, so everybody can paraphrase them. Okay. Really should be paraphrasing description and that sort of thing. Okay. All right. So that's up. Please respond to that. That's good for class participation. Okay. All right. Um, and then You can use that discussion. I mean, some people didn't use the discussion point at all, and the one thing I don't allow, and if I was not clear about this in the past, I'll be clear about it now. You really should be using full names on stories. These are not okay. Yes, maybe like criticizing housing might make people feel a little bit uneasy, but come on, I mean, like everybody complains about housing, okay, at Rutgers and that sort of thing, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. Okay, there's nobody going to come after you. There's no housing fairy or a housing warden. But well, not only that, but the point is that yeah, there's like what 17 people on the discussion point right now who put their names on it. So, you know, there's no need to actually like write a story with anonymous sources or just maybe somebody's first name. You should write the full name, and especially since we have a discussion point where people actually did use their full names, okay? Um, I have like additional source material here that's actually similar to what we had on the discussion point. It shows like, yeah, you saw some of those reduced materials before. And there's a video basically, I may actually show this during my video on Monday, I'm not sure, where I built up a story using the various discussion points. And then I have an example. I also have a magazine story example, which I can show, but I really rather you pay attention to this because magazines actually can have like really long paragraphs. But I actually did, okay, that's not it. The same guy, Andrew Nussbaum. Thank you, Andrew. Um, actually is an example of a story that worked. Rutgers freshman Destiny Claudio suggests to adapt to wet and wild weather patterns that plague campus life. Claudio says that her daily community class is disrupted by frequent rainfall, and that so basically we have a little bit of suspense. What does wet and wild mean? What the hell does that mean? And that she often has to arrive at her classes getting soaked. So basically, this is an unpleasant experience. Rapid temperature. That's another thing too. You have kind of these rapid fluctuations, so it's not all just like getting hotter, but it's like this up and down thing. The weather can be very inconsistent around here, so take that into consideration when you're writing a story. You have associated health problems that are with that. People can get sick from that, like the up and down weather. Um, you know, then I'm down for the most count for the most week. Sick and miserable in my dorm. It's a good, colorful, emotional quote. And it comes to essentially a nut graph. Okay. Claudia's concerns are echoed by others around the campus who feel that the weather adds emotional stress to their already stressful lives. Rutgers students are fuming over the cold. And this is probably done during fall or spring, but probably fall. Cold and rainy season want spring to come. Actually, it's spring. I'm sorry. Studying the weather, studying the health and logistical order. See, it's basically very much like that housing story. You have an idea, which is that the weather sucks, and then you have like why it sucks, the angle. Okay, and then you go into the transitions, and then you break it down into the smaller anecdotes and follow that path. Okay. All right. So that's that. Okay. So again, what do we have due? Please ignore these things that are not actually posted yet. Again, they'll be posting the feature assignment rewrite next week. But again, what do we have due? We have of course, the rewrite to the housing reaction. I've created a few of those already. We have the Megalomania press release assignment. That's going to be due Friday as well. These two. Again, you should by now have the material. If you haven't gotten the material on the Megalomania thing yet, you should have reached out to me already. Okay. I mean, there will be a rerun on this. You can contact Bill Borden again, but still. Then there's the rewrite that'll be due in a week. And then of course the feature assignment. That's actually also due in a week. Okay. And then of course the proposal will be due Monday for the major assignment, and you'll have about a week and a half or more to do that. Okay. All right. So that's it with the feature assignment. I'll be talking more about that on Monday. Thanks very much, everybody, and I will be talking to you.